The ceiling fans above the lobby of the Colton house turned slow, brass blades cutting through columns of afternoon light. Marble floors, tall windows. A man in a flannel shirt stood near the front desk, a canvas work bag at his feet. Todd Brennan crossed the lobby in 4 measured strides, adjusted his cufflink, and raised a hand toward 2 uniformed staff. His voice carried across the room without effort. "Sir, I'm going to need you to leave." The man didn't move. Staff tried to remove a single dad from the hotel lobby that Monday in Savannah. They had no idea he would soon be the new owner. Before we get into how all of this started, go ahead and drop a comment below. Have you ever been completely misjudged by someone who had no idea who they were really talking to? 6 hours before that lobby standoff, Ben Lawson pulled a 2011 Ford F-150 into the guest lot behind the Colton house. The engine ticked in the morning heat. Savannah, in June, pressed down on everything: the live oaks, the iron fences, the air itself. Grace sat in the passenger seat, backpack across her lap. 9 years old, hair in a ponytail already coming apart. School had let out 3 days ago, and Ben didn't have childcare until the following week, so she came along. She always came along. He tapped her knee. "Ready?" She zipped her backpack. "Is this the one with the old floors?" "Marble," he said. 1891. The Colton house sat on Bull Street, 3 stories of Victorian brick, wrought iron balconies, 94 rooms. Ben had studied the listing packet for 3 weeks before driving down from Charlotte. He knew the square footage, the occupancy rates, the deferred maintenance estimates. What he didn't know yet was what the walls would tell him when he put his hands on them. He pushed through the front door with Grace beside him. The lobby opened up: high ceilings, slow brass fans, a crystal chandelier from the 1920s catching light in a way that made everything look both grand and tired. Ben told the young woman at the front desk that he was the building inspector, scheduled through the broker for a 5-day assessment. She looked at his flannel, looked at Grace, then she said she'd check with management and disappeared. 5 minutes passed. 10. Todd Brennan appeared from a frosted glass door. Black vest, dark tie, hotel keycard spinning between his fingers. He stopped 6 feet from Ben and looked him over head to boots, then the bag, then the girl. "And you are?" Ben explained. "Inspector. Broker scheduled. 5-day scope." Todd shook his head. Nothing in the system about an inspection. No appointment. No authorization. He tilted his chin toward the door. "You can wait outside." Ben took out his phone and held up the confirmation email: date, time, property name, broker's signature. Todd glanced at the screen and looked away. "I don't care what that says. We don't let people walk through our property without verified credentials." That was when Kate Mitchell stepped out of the elevator. She was 33, dark blonde hair pulled back, a leather folder under one arm. She'd been general manager of the Colton house for 2 years, hired by Meridian Hospitality to stop the bleeding at their most historic and least profitable property. She read the lobby in 3 seconds. Todd planted between Ben and the hallway, a man in work clothes not backing down. A child beside him. Kate took Ben's phone, read the email, pulled a printed schedule from her own folder. "The inspection is on my calendar, Todd. Confirmed last week." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. This was a general manager addressing her assistant, and the gap between those titles filled the room. Todd's jaw tightened. He stepped back. Kate turned to Ben. "I apologize for the confusion." Her eyes moved to Grace for half a second. The girl stood close to her father, one hand on her backpack strap, calm in a way that seemed too old for 9. "Thank you," Ben said. 2 words. Nothing more. In her office, Kate laid out floor plans and room access rotations. Ben listened, took notes, asked 2 precise questions about the mechanical rooms. When Kate offered to set aside a room for Grace during the inspection, Ben paused. She'll be fine, she's used to it. Kate didn't press. But that evening, alone in her office, the sentence came back. She's used to it, not she'll keep busy. Used to it, like waiting was something the girl had learned the way other children learn to ride bikes. Tuesday morning, Ben started in the basement. He worked methodically tapping walls, running a moisture meter along pipe joints, opening every electrical panel, and cross-referencing serial numbers against the original building plans he downloaded from Savannah's municipal archive. The young maintenance tech Todd had sent to shadow him barely out of trade school, sent because the chief engineer was conveniently unavailable, watched without understanding most of it. He'd never seen an inspector bring their own blueprints. At 11:14, Frank Jessup came down to fix a leaking shutoff valve. Frank was 59. Gray hair cropped short, hands that hadn't been fully clean in 30 years. He'd been chief engineer at the Colton House for 8 years, and before that he'd spent a decade in property management at a firm called Harding and Cole. He heard the ultrasonic thickness gauge before he saw it, a high, thin pulse bouncing off concrete. The kind of tool no building inspector carries. Frank came around the corner and saw Ben crouched near the foundation wall, running a probe across the slab in a grid pattern. Frank's eyes moved to the clipboard on the junction box beside Ben. The letterhead was small, but Frank had spent 12 years reading property documents. Lawson Capital Holdings. Frank stopped walking. He knew that name. Not from Savannah, from 12 years ago, when he'd worked on the 8th floor of Harding and Cole's Atlanta office. There had been a young VP in acquisitions who'd moved through conference rooms like he owned them. Ben Lawson, youngest vice president in the firm's history. Then, Northgate Partners swallowed Harding and Cole in a hostile acquisition, dissolved Lawson's entire division overnight, and the man vanished. What Frank was looking at now was not a building inspector. Ben Lawson had spent a decade evaluating commercial properties worth hundreds of millions. When Harding and Cole collapsed under him and his wife Laura died the same year, he hadn't fought for a lesser role at the company that swallowed his. He'd walked out, taken his expertise and his grief, earned an inspector's license, formed a private LLC, and started buying undervalued commercial properties across the Southeast. Quietly, the Colton House was the 7th. He wasn't inspecting for someone else. He was inspecting for himself before he signed the check. Frank turned back to the shutoff valve. Said nothing. But his hands moved slower than usual. That evening, Kate found Ben in the second-floor hallway near a window overlooking Forsyth Park. The light was going amber through the old curtains. "How's the inspection going?" she asked. "The bones of this building are solid. Whoever designed it understood load distribution in a way most modern architects don't." Kate leaned against the doorframe. His name was Colton, the original architect. He lived here until the day he died. "That makes sense," Ben said. "You can tell when someone built a place they planned to stay in." The hallway went quiet. Just the two of them and the Savannah light angling through glass. Neither moved to fill the silence. Ben gave a small nod and walked toward the stairwell. Kate stayed by the window. What she didn't know, Frank Jessup was 3 floors below, staring at a name he'd typed into a search bar. What she also didn't know, Frank had something else. A gray binder, thick with 5 years of handwritten records, hidden behind old pipes in a locked cabinet that Todd had told him to destroy 2 years ago. Frank had said he'd thrown it out. He hadn't. Tuesday afternoon bled into Wednesday morning. Ben needed to inspect the HVAC system on the roof and the equipment room on the 3rd floor. Both access doors were locked. He went to Todd's office to request the keys. Todd sat behind his desk, didn't stand. A framed photo of himself shaking hands with a former Savannah mayor hung on the wall behind him. He picked up a pen and turned it between his fingers. "I'll get the keys to you when I can. I've got a full schedule today." Ben looked at him for 3 seconds. Not angry, not pleading, just looking. The way a man looks at a lock, he's already decided to pick a different way. Then he left the office. He called the broker. the broker called Meridian. Within the hour, Kate received a directive from corporate: provide full and unrestricted access to the inspector, effective immediately. Kate walked to the third-floor equipment room herself, used her master key, and held the door open for Ben. She didn't go to Todd's office to explain. She sent an email, copied Meridian Corporate. Full access has been granted to the inspector per corporate directive. Todd read that email on his phone, standing in the second-floor hallway. His face went red from the collar up. On the roof, Ben found what he expected, and worse. 3 of 4 chiller units had gone 18 months past their scheduled service dates. The maintenance logs in the system said serviced, but the air filters hadn't been changed. The serial numbers printed on the service reports didn't match the serial numbers stamped on the machines, and one condenser coil had corroded to the point where it was pulling 60% more power than its rating. Someone had filed phantom maintenance reports and pocketed the contractor fees. Ben photographed everything, wrote nothing in the official report yet, told no one. That afternoon, Kate brought Ben to the first-floor ballroom, the hotel's largest event space, a room with a vaulted ceiling, original crown molding, and a crystal chandelier from 1920 that still worked on its original wiring. Meridian had talked for years about gutting it and converting it into a modern conference center. Kate had argued against it twice, lost both times. Ben stood in the center of the room, looking up. His hand found one of the original cornice columns, fingers tracing the plaster detail the way a man touches something he doesn't want to see damaged. "This room shouldn't be renovated," he said. "It should be restored." "There's a difference." Kate felt something shift in her chest. She'd said those exact words, restore, not renovate, in 2 separate proposals to Meridian's development committee. Both had been rejected on cost grounds. And now a building inspector was standing in her ballroom saying the thing she'd been saying for 2 years, and nobody had listened. "That's what I told them." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. Ben looked at her. Held the look 1 beat longer than professional. Then he turned back to the column and pulled out his tape measure. That same evening, Todd made a phone call, not to Meridian Corporate, to Greg, a mid-level board member he'd cultivated over years of quarterly dinners and golf outings. Todd's voice was controlled, concerned, reasonable. He told Greg the inspector was unprofessional, brought a child to a commercial site, no verifiable credentials. Was overstepping the scope of the assessment. Greg said he'd look into it. His tone didn't commit to anything, but Todd heard what he wanted to hear. Wednesday at noon, Grace sat in the garden behind the hotel. White iron bench under an old live oak, dappled light moving across the flagstones. She had a book open on her lap, a children's adventure novel, the cover bent and soft from rereading. She was on chapter 12. Kate came out through the garden door, coffee in hand, and saw her. She hadn't planned to stop. She was between meetings, running on 4 hours of sleep, carrying the weight of a property sale she couldn't control and an assistant manager she couldn't trust. But something about the girl sitting alone under that tree, quiet, unhurried, completely at ease, made Kate slow down. She sat on the bench beside Grace. "What are you reading?" Grace held up the cover. Kate smiled. "I read that one when I was about your age." Couldn't put it down. Grace looked at her with a small, quick recognition the way one reader looks at another. She smiled back. Not wide, just enough. They sat together for a few minutes without talking. The oak leaves shifted overhead. The sound of Bull Street traffic came through, muffled by the garden wall. Kate finished her coffee. Grace turned a page. It was the most peaceful 5 minutes Kate had experienced in the Colton house in months. Inside the hotel, Ben was on the 2nd floor, and what he was finding was no longer a matter of deferred maintenance. The fire suppression system in the East Wing 4 guest rooms, all currently occupied, had been manually shut off. Sprinkler valves closed, flow switches disabled. The quarterly fire safety inspection report filed with the city said all systems operational. Ben pulled the report from the binder Kate had provided on day 1 and turned to the signature page. Todd Brennan, Assistant General Manager. Ben set the binder down on the hallway carpet. He stood still for a moment, hands at his sides, looking at the closed valve in the ceiling access panel above him. He'd seen this pattern before at Harding and Cole during acquisition audits. Inflated vendor contracts, deferred maintenance disguised as completed work, falsified inspection reports. It was always the same profile, someone who'd been in the building long enough to own the paper trail and connected enough that no one checked behind them. Todd had been at the Colton house for 14 years. Ben didn't tell Kate. Not yet. He needed documentation that couldn't be explained away. Not suspicion, not inference, but records. At the end of the day, he returned the master key at the front desk. Kate was there, handling a billing dispute with a guest. She finished, turned to him. Professional. Tired. Everything go smoothly today? He nodded. He noticed the faint shadow under her eyes, not obvious, but there if you were looking. Long day? He asked. Kate paused. No one in the building asked her that. Not Todd, not the department heads, not Meridian Corporate on their weekly calls. No one treated her like a person who got tired. Every day's a long day in this building. She said it lightly, then realized she'd just told the truth to someone she barely knew. A beat of silence. Ben placed the key on the counter. The building's worth the fight, he said. Then he picked up his bag and walked toward the front door. Kate watched him go. She couldn't explain why that sentence, "the building's worth the fight," settled something in her that had been unsettled for months. Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Todd moved. He called an outside security company different from the hotel's usual vendor and hired 2 guards to stand at the basement mechanical room door. He told them it was an internal security protocol, authorized by management. He didn't specify which manager. Thursday morning at 7:45, Ben came down to finish his final inspection zone, the pump room and storage basement, the last areas on his checklist. The guards blocked the stairwell door, restricted area. No access without authorization from Mr. Brennan. Ben took out his phone and called Kate. She arrived in 8 minutes. Hair still damp, no coffee, jacket thrown on over a blouse she'd grabbed in a hurry. She looked at the 2 guards, looked at Ben, looked at the locked door. "I'm the general manager of this hotel," she said to the guards. "This door opens now." They hesitated, looked at each other. They'd been hired by Todd, but the woman standing in front of them held the title that outranked his. They stepped aside. Kate turned to Ben. "I'm sorry. None of this should be happening." "It's not coming from you," Ben said. "Not a consolation. A fact." She went upstairs, found Todd in his office, closed the door behind her. "You hired outside security to block a corporate-authorized inspection." Her voice was low and even. "Without my knowledge, without my approval. Do you have any idea what that looks like to Meridian?" Todd leaned back in his chair. "That inspector doesn't belong in restricted mechanical areas. I've been managing the operations of this building for 14 years. You've been here for 2. Kate put both hands on his desk and leaned forward. "And in 2 years, I've figured out that this hotel's problems don't start with the plumbing." She straightened up and walked out. Todd sat motionless, his hand white-knuckled around a pen. In the basement, Ben found the storage room at the end of the corridor. Filing cabinets. Boxes of old maintenance records, dating back to 2015. He pulled invoices, paper copies of contractor bills for HVAC service, plumbing repairs, electrical work, and compared them against the digital records Kate had provided at the start of the inspection. The numbers didn't match. Every paper invoice was 20 to 35% higher than the corresponding digital entry. Someone had been maintaining 2 sets of books, one for the files, one for the money. Ben closed the cabinet, stood in the dim basement light, breathing the damp air, hearing the hum of the old boiler through the wall. He knew what he was looking at. He also knew that suspicion wasn't enough. He needed someone inside to confirm it. He didn't know that person was already looking for him. Upstairs, Kate caught Ben on the stairwell between the basement and the first floor. The light was yellow and institutional, the concrete walls bare. "What did you find down there?" she asked. Ben met her eyes. "You should take a close look at your chiller service records. Compare what's in the system against what's in the paper files downstairs." He didn't explain further. Kate studied his face open, unguarded, but holding something back. Not from deception. From discipline. He was telling her enough to look, without telling her what she'd find. That meant he wanted her to see it for herself. "I will," she said. They stood on the stairwell, Ben one step lower, their eyes level, the basement light falling warm and flat across both their faces, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then they went separate directions, Kate up, Ben down. What Ben had now: 2 sets of invoices that didn't match, falsified fire inspection reports, and phantom maintenance records on 3 chiller units. What he needed: someone inside the building who could confirm the paper trail led where he thought it led. He didn't know that Frank Jessup had spent the last 2 nights unable to sleep, sitting in his kitchen, staring at a name on a phone screen, thinking about a gray binder hidden behind old pipes in a room that smelled like boiler steam. Thursday at noon. Todd left the building for lunch, a habit he kept every day, 45 minutes at a cafe on Broughton Street. Frank watched him go from the second-floor window. Then, Frank walked downstairs. He found Ben in the first-floor corridor, near the ballroom doors, writing on his clipboard. The hallway was empty. Frank approached with his hands at his sides, the binder tucked under his left arm. It was gray, thick, ring-bound, with a cracked plastic cover. 5 years of handwritten entries. Every work order Todd had canceled. Every repair Frank had completed without budget. Every invoice he'd been told to sign that didn't match the work he'd actually done. Dates, equipment codes, real costs versus what Todd submitted to Meridian. On every page, Frank's signature and the date, proof. Frank held it out. "I was at Harding and Cole," he said. "Property management. 8th floor. Atlanta office." He paused. "I know who you are, Mr. Lawson." Ben looked at Frank, then at the binder. He took it, opened it, turned pages slowly. The math was there, line by line, year by year. The gap between what Todd billed and what was actually spent totaled more than $340,000 over 5 years. "He's been keeping 2 sets of books since before Miss Mitchell was brought in," Frank said. "She doesn't know. She's been trying to fix numbers that were rigged before she got here." Ben closed the binder. "Why are you giving me this now?" Frank looked at his own hands, calloused. 59 years of work written into every knuckle. "Because if you're buying this building, you should know what's underneath it." He stopped, swallowed. "And because she's been doing the right thing in the wrong situation, and somebody ought to say so." Ben held the binder against his chest. "I'll take care of it." Frank nodded once. Turned. Walked back toward the mechanical room. Kate saw part of it. She'd come around the corner from the service hallway, heading toward the front desk. She saw Frank hand something to Ben, a binder, thick and gray. She didn't hear the words, but she saw Frank's face. In 2 years of working alongside the man, she had never once seen him stand that straight or look someone in the eye that long. He was always stooped, always careful, always quiet. Not now. Kate didn't ask. Not yet. But the pieces were beginning to connect. An inspector who carried equipment no inspector should own. Chiller logs that didn't add up. The sentence on the stairwell. And now Frank, the most cautious man in the building, handing over records in a hallway like a man finally setting down something heavy. That afternoon, Kate found Ben in the ballroom. He was measuring the vaulted ceiling again, running a laser level along the crown molding. She closed the ballroom doors behind her. "Who are you?" she asked. Not angry, not accusatory. Just direct. Ben lowered the level, set it on a chair. "I'm the building inspector," he said. Building inspectors don't bring ultrasonic gauges to routine assessments. They don't pull 1891 municipal blueprints for reference, and my chief engineer doesn't hand them 5 years of personal records in a hallway without a reason. She paused. So, I'm asking you again, who are you? The ballroom was silent, except for the faint tick of the chandelier chain shifting in the draft from the air vent. Ben looked at Kate, and in that look was something she hadn't seen in him before. Not deflection, not calculation. Something closer to respect. When this is finished, he said, you'll have every answer. Kate held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she turned, opened the ballroom door, and walked out without closing it behind her. Thursday night. Todd went to the mechanical room and checked the locked cabinet behind the pipes. He'd always known Frank never threw out the binder men who run long cons keep track of every loose thread. The cabinet was unlocked. Empty. He stood there for a full minute, boiler humming, fluorescent light buzzing. Then he called Greg at Meridian. The inspector isn't who he says he is. He's been accessing financial records without authorization. Internal documents are missing. This is a security breach, Greg. Shut this down tonight. Greg said he'd look into it in the morning. Todd hung up. His hand was shaking. At 9 that night, Greg called Kate. She was still at her desk. She was always still at her desk. He asked about a security concern with the inspector. Kate listened, then spoke. There's no breach. The inspector has operated within Meridian's authorized scope. If there's a security concern, it's the unauthorized private guards, Mr. Brennan hired twice this week without my knowledge. She let the silence hold. And Greg, ask yourself why Todd is afraid of which records this inspector has seen. The call ended. Kate sat in the dark of her office. She didn't go home for another hour. 2 miles away, Ben sat at the table in his motel room. Grace was asleep in the next bed, blanket at her chin, breathing the slow rhythm of a child who trusted tomorrow would be fine because her father said so. The gray binder lay open before him. Ben photographed every page and sent them through encrypted email to his attorney in Atlanta, the chiller photos, the fire reports, the dual invoices. Subject line: Colton House, due diligence addendum, fraud documentation. He closed the laptop, looked at Grace sleeping. Tomorrow this would end. Friday morning, 7:30. Ben walked toward the front entrance of the Colton House. Todd was already there with 2 new security guards, different company, same purpose. Your access has been revoked. Effective immediately. Ben set his bag down. By whom? By this office. You're the assistant general manager. You don't have that authority. Todd stepped closer, voice dropping. I've run this hotel for 14 years. Every pipe, every wire, every dollar. I decide who walks through that door. Ben said nothing. He stood on the front steps and waited. Kate came around the side of the building. A clerk had texted her. She saw Todd blocking the entrance, guards flanking, Ben standing in the morning sun. Todd. Step away from the door. Kate. You don't understand. Step away. 2 seconds of nothing. Then Todd moved back. The guards followed. Ben picked up his bag and walked in. He passed Kate in the doorway, and their eyes met everything that had built across 4 days held in that look. The lobby was the same marble and brass and chandelier, the same room where he'd nearly been thrown out Monday. But the room was different now because the people standing in it were different. Ben took out his phone, dialed. His voice carried clear across the lobby. It's Lawson. We're moving to close. Send the acquisition documents to Meridian's counsel this morning. Kate stood 4 feet away. She heard every word. Lawson, acquisition, close. She looked at him, and, for the first time, understood. Todd stood behind them, his face the color of old paper. At 10 that morning, Meridian Hospitality's board of directors convened on an emergency conference call. 3 members in New York, 2 in Atlanta. Kate joined from her office at the Colton House on a secure line. Ben was not on the call. He was the buyer, not a Meridian employee. but his attorney had delivered the addendum to Meridian's legal counsel at 8 a.m. The counsel presented the findings to the board. Over $340,000 in inflated maintenance invoices over a 5-year period, all processed under Todd Brennan's authorization. Falsified fire safety inspection reports on the second-floor East Wing, signed by Brennan. Disabled sprinkler systems in occupied guest rooms. Potential federal fire code violations that, if made public before the sale closed, would reduce the property's valuation by at least 25%. The board deliberated for 12 minutes. The vote was 5-0. Terminate Todd Brennan immediately. Proceed with the sale to Lawson Capital Holdings at the agreed price, contingent on the buyer correcting all fire code violations within 90 days. Kate called Todd into her office at 11:15. 2 HR representatives had flown in from Atlanta on the early flight. They were already seated when Todd walked in. Kate didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. HR handled the terms and the paperwork. Todd looked at Kate from across her desk. "You did this." Kate shook her head. "You did this to yourself. 14 years, Todd, and this is what you did with them." Todd stood, picked up the cardboard box they'd given him, walked through the lobby without looking at anyone. The young front desk clerk, the same woman who'd been there on Monday, watched him go but said nothing. After the call, after Todd left, after the HR reps caught their cab to the airport, Kate sat alone in her office with the door closed. The leather folder she'd carried on Monday was still on the corner of her desk, untouched since that first morning. She knew now. The buyer was Ben Lawson. The inspector was the new owner. The man in the flannel shirt, who Todd had tried to eject from the lobby 4 days ago, was about to sign his name on the deed to the building she'd been trying to save for 2 years. She looked at the brass nameplate on her desk. Catherine Mitchell, General Manager. She didn't know how much longer it would be there. A knock at the door. She opened it. Ben stood on the threshold. He didn't step inside. It was still her office. "I want you to know I didn't come here to hide anything. I came to see the building for what it actually is, not what a listing sheet says it is." Kate looked at him. "And what is it?" "It's something that should have had better people behind it a long time ago." He paused. "It already has one." The silence between them was different now. Not the cautious silence of two professionals measuring each other. Something closer to recognition. Something neither of them named. Kate didn't say thank you. She gave a small nod, the kind that seals an agreement nobody wrote down. That afternoon, the preliminary sale documents were signed digitally. Ben's attorney in Atlanta confirmed the closing date, 10 business days. Lawson Capital Holdings would officially take ownership of the Colton house. Ben found Frank in the basement hallway, the same corridor where they'd first crossed paths on Tuesday morning. Near the old shut-off valve Frank had come down to fix. Frank didn't seem to know what to say. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the concrete floor. Ben spoke first. "You kept that binder for 5 years." Frank nodded slowly. "I didn't know what I was keeping it for. I just knew I couldn't throw it out. That was enough." Frank looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. Not crying, just the kind of redness that comes from years of holding something tight and finally letting go. "I'm not going to tell you what to do next," Ben said. "But if you want to stay, the job is yours. For as long as you want it." Frank pressed his lips together, nodded, turned and walked back toward the mechanical room, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Ben watched him go, then headed upstairs. Kate spent the rest of the afternoon managing the transition. She called each department head individually, housekeeping, front desk, food and beverage, security, and informed them of the ownership change. Her voice was steady, professional, measured. She answered their questions, reassured them about their positions, told them what she knew and didn't pretend to know what she didn't. When the last meeting ended and the office door closed, she sat down and let out a breath she'd been holding since Monday. She looked at the brass nameplate again. Catherine Mitchell, General Manager. She still didn't know if it would survive the transfer. Late that afternoon, Kate walked out to the garden behind the hotel. The white iron bench under the live oak. The bench where Grace had sat on Wednesday with her book. The bench where Kate had sat beside her for 5 quiet minutes that felt like the first real breath she'd taken in months. The bench was empty. But on the seat, placed carefully so the wind wouldn't take it, was a book. The same children's adventure novel. A slip of paper was tucked between the pages as a bookmark. Kate picked it up and read the handwriting round. Careful, the penmanship of a 9-year-old who took her time. For Kate. I finished it. The ending is really good. Grace. Kate sat down, held the book on her lap, ran her thumb across the girl's handwriting. Then she turned to the bookmarked page and started reading. Ben came through the garden door a few minutes later. He saw Kate on the bench, Grace's book open in her hands, reading in the shade of the oak tree. She was sitting in the exact spot where his daughter had sat 2 days ago, and something about the image, the book, the bench, the light coming through the leaves in shifting patterns across her hair stopped him at the doorway. He didn't say anything. He stood there with his hands in the pockets of his jacket, watching her read, and for a moment the hotel and the deal and the binder and Todd and Meridian and the entire 5-day weight of it fell away, and there was just this. A woman reading a book his daughter had left for her, in a garden behind a building he was about to own, in a city neither of them had been born in. He stood there for 3 seconds. Then he turned and went back inside, leaving her in the quiet. Kate looked up when she heard the footsteps recede. She hadn't seen him, but she knew he'd been there the way you know when someone has been watching you not to intrude, but because they couldn't quite make themselves look away. 2 weeks later. Friday. The closing was complete. Lawson Capital Holdings held full legal title to the Colton House, Savannah, Georgia. There was no ceremony, no champagne, no press release. Ben wasn't that kind of owner. He arrived at 8 in the morning, parked the F-150 in the same guest lot, walked through the front door. The heavy oak door, the one Todd had blocked with his body and 2 hired guards. Ben pushed it open and stepped into the lobby. The marble floors caught the morning light the same way they had 2 weeks ago. The brass ceiling fans turned at the same speed. The chandelier from 1920 still hung from the same chain, still scattered light in the same tired, beautiful pattern. But the front desk clerk, the young woman who'd been there on day 1, looked up and said something no one in this building had ever said to him before. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson." He gave her a nod. Walked to the GM's office. Kate was already there, seated behind her desk, folder open, reading glasses on. She'd prepared everything, the operational summary, the staffing plan, the quarterly budget, the renovation priorities she'd been proposing for 2 years. This was either her last meeting or her first. She didn't know which. Ben sat down across from her, looked at the folder but didn't open it. "I didn't buy this hotel to rebuild it from scratch," he said. "I bought it because someone was already doing the right work here. I want to make sure she has what she needs to keep doing it." Kate looked at him. He'd said she, not the management team, not the staff, not the general manager. She. Her eyes held on his for a beat. 1 blink. Then she nodded, small, certain. The way you accept something you've earned but hadn't allowed yourself to expect. That afternoon, Grace came running through the garden door. Not because anyone told her to, because she'd decided the live oak in the garden behind the Colton house was her favorite tree in Savannah, and now that her dad owned the building, she figured she could sit under it whenever she wanted. Kate was already on the bench. Grace's book lay on her lap, finished. Every page. Grace sat beside her. "Did you like the ending?" "I did. Dad says good endings are the ones you don't see coming." Kate smiled, looked up from the bench toward the garden door. Ben was standing on the threshold, hands in his pockets, leaning against the frame, the same spot, the same posture. But this time, Kate saw him, and this time, he didn't turn away. The live oak shifted overhead. Savannah light came through the leaves and fell in moving patterns across the bench. The book, the girl, the woman, the man in the doorway, the old brick building behind him with its marble floors and brass fans and a heavy oak door that stood wide open. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. He'd come to inspect a building. He stayed because it already felt like someone's home.